welcome to another amazing episode of Say It Online, where we help digital agency owners stop just randomly shouting into the void and start communicating meaningfully and effectively in this digital age. I'm your host, Say Gabriel, and this episode was brought to you by our sponsor, Nancy Content. If you're sick of conversion content being a huge pain in your agency's butt, especially websites, campaigns, etc., let's talk. With the smoothest content process ever, a team of unbelievably skilled and organized content strategists, and years of subcontracting experience, Anansi is looking to make your life as a digital agency owner unbelievably easier. Just head, if you're interested, to anansicontent.com, that's ANANSI content.com, and hit Let's Talk. And now, without further ado, here's our episode. Hello, listeners, and welcome to another amazing episode of Say It Online, where we help digital agency owners communicate in this modern age of confusion and over-information. I am super stoked today to welcome Rachael Kay Albers, fellow entrepreneur, digital agency owner that I personally have had a huge crush on for years. Welcome to the show, Rachael.
Well, thank you for having me. The crush is mutual. There's mutual crushing going on here.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear it. I know all of our conversations are just so amazing to me. So we'll try to keep it on track today and not just rant about all this awesome fun stuff that we get to talking about. So today, Rachael has done so many cool things in the digital agency world. Some of you guys might know her from her regular video show, Awkward Marketing, which, as far as I'm concerned, is one of the best and a rare form of unique content on the internet. So today we're going to be talking quite a bit about that, how that kind of has shifted things for her, how she got that going, etc. But before we do that, Rachael, why don't you just take a few minutes to tell us a little bit about yourself personally, give us a little bit of an overview of your business, all that fun stuff.
Well, I would be delighted. I'm Rachael Kay Albers. I'm the owner of RKA Ink, which is a branding, web design, and marketing studio. As you already so wonderfully introduced, I'm also the host of a business comedy show called Awkward Marketing. And I like to tell people to think of me as the one-woman SNL of biz comedy, right? Because I help entrepreneurs create epic, unforgettable brands online, and we use comedy and storytelling to do it.
Awesome. Such a succinct, just very well said, very succinct. You can hear my crush coming out a bit more. So let's take a little bit more. So Awkward Marketing, I love your description of it as kind of you're a one-woman SNL of the business and marketing world. So how did you come up with this idea? Where did it come from? Have you always wanted to do this? Tell us more.
No, absolutely not. I did not always want to. I've got a background in theater, a background in comedy. So I've always wanted to be on SNL, Saturday Night Live, which is a U.S. show where, every Saturday night, they bring famous people on and they do sketches. But, we both serve clients who are creating content for their businesses. And a lot of people get really stressed out, like, oh, I've got to come up with this incredible idea out the gate. And it's certainly not how it happened for me. And I think it's not how it happens for most entrepreneurs. Awkward Marketing in its early stages was your basic talking head Facebook Live show. I'd hop on Facebook every week and do a little marketing teachable. And years before, I had bought the domain awkwardmarketing.com with no plan for it. I just thought, marketing is awkward. I also own that one as well, marketingisawkward.com. And a lot of people struggle with it. So I bought this domain not knowing what I was going to do with it. And then when I would get on this Facebook Live show, I'd have all these funny, weird moments where I would, not know what I was saying, or I would have a weird pause. And so I started just calling it Awkward Marketing. And how it turned into, though, this business comedy show, as I call it, was I did a few special episodes. And the first one was a live musical. I did Facebook Live, the musical. And I got on Facebook Live and I had costume changes and songs all about marketing. And I just, had a lot of fun with it. And that got a ton of traction, just a ton of views. And so I started thinking, people are digging this kind of out of the box format. So a few months later, I bought a green screen, I got a bunch of wigs, and I decided to create this series called the Top 5 Awkward Marketers, where I kind of embodied what I felt was like the worst marketing happening out there. And that just also took off and made me say, okay, wow, this has got to be the format of the show. I got to do characters, I got to do comedy. And that's how I turned it into what it is today.
That's such an awesome story. And it's awesome for a lot of different ways. I want to kind of unpack the reasons why it's awesome, not just because, say, things are cool and awkward marketing is pretty much your dream come true. I love how you started out, something that you're saying here is you started out, this is something we've chatted about before, by kind of just doing it. And the kind of awkward side of things, which is what ultimately made you so unique, kind of came a little bit later as you realized that people were actually open to that. So what caused you to just decide to do it and do a Facebook Live? What was kind of, I know there's a lot of people who are thinking about this, but kind of hesitating to make the jump. Is there any kind of insight you can give them in terms of kind of getting their own ongoing content going in that way?
So, I knew that I needed to be creating content on a regular basis. I had to be visible. I run this digital marketing agency, but I wasn't walking my talk. I wasn't doing what I teach my clients, which is to show up and create content week after week and be consistent. And I had struggled because if I was writing a blog post or even creating a pre-recorded video, it would take me hours and hours, maybe a whole day. And I was just belaboring every detail. So what was cool with the Facebook Live format was it's a one-shot deal, right? You get on there, it's one take. You don't have the opportunity to do it and redo it. And so it kind of was this accountability of, okay, I'm going to show up, I'm going to deliver a teachable live every week. I will not have the opportunity to do it again and again. I just have to do it and get into the practice of being visible regularly and creating content regularly. And so that's what made me do it. And, when you say to the world, okay, I'm going to be here Wednesday at 11 a.m., rain or shine, no matter what's going on in my business, it created that external accountability that kept me coming back week after week and doing it, which is what everybody needs to be creating content regularly. And I needed to be doing it too.
Yeah, that's really powerful. So again, just some takeaways that I'm hearing here. So one is that, and this is something I've experienced as well, is that you knew you had to produce ongoing content of some kind in order to support your brand, support your strategy. But you were finding that you were spending a lot of time doing the written work. So one of the advantages of this was that you could just kind of show up, do your piece, and be done with it. So that I want to call attention to that. A lot of people think of video as scarier or harder. And, maybe looking at the awkward marketing videos as they are today, they certainly have matured quite a bit in terms of all those different elements. But I really like what you're saying, which is just that it was actually easier for you. You just set a time to show up. You were accountable to all these other people and you just kept doing it and kind of allowed it to grow from there. I think that's really powerful. I'm curious about this transition from kind of just the Facebook Live to the awkward marketing. Why, you've said many times, I know something that is kind of like a tagline is that, and I can't do it justice, but marketing is often awkward for a lot of people. So talking about kind of the premise of awkward marketing, Rachael, I'm curious. So why is comedy such a powerful thing for people? Why comedy?
I think that comedy dissolves the discomfort that we feel around the topic of marketing. And whether it's marketing or any other topic, comedy is a disruptor. It softens difficult topics. So a lot of people feel uncomfortable marketing themselves for myriad reasons. They have these connotations that marketing is sleazy or manipulative or predatory. And comedy is a way of, shaking off the nerves and the awkwardness, that people feel around marketing themselves and getting them to think differently. A lot of people like to complain about the things they dislike about the marketing world. And I like to say complaining is boring. What are you going to do about it? So comedy is this way that we can explore this topic. We can all laugh about it. We can shake off the discomfort we feel. And then it's like, okay, let's find a positive way to move forward with this. And so we can laugh and then we can learn and then we can get stuff done.
I think that's really powerful. So not just what I'm hearing is that you're taking the kind of very things that people are afraid of in marketing or the things that, potentially get a bad rap in marketing. You're shining a light directly on it. Instead of saying, we're just not going to mention this. You're like, let's shine a light directly on it and laugh about it. and then actually take action off of it. Here's what you can do about it. I really, really like that. I think that a lot of people are interested in leveraging comedy, but maybe aren't sure how, or they're afraid of being vulnerable. Do you have any insight on how people can bring comedy more into their communication if they're not sure where to start?
So I like to say that people will ask me all the time, how could I incorporate comedy into my brand? I'm not a comedian. I don't have funny one-liners. So I like to encourage them to think about it as bringing lightness into their messaging, into their content, versus trying to make it, like a ba-dum-bum stand-up comedy set. If you can lighten up, and really that comes down to using more relatable human language, talking to your audience the way you would talk to a friend, or even the way you would talk to somebody at the grocery store, because I think people don't realize that we are natural comedians. We always, our tendency is to try to find lightness in every situation. And so you're standing at the grocery store and something weird happens, or it's a long line, and it's your tendency to turn to your neighbor and be like, oh man, what a day. And or something like that. And we want to laugh, even if it's not laugh out loud funny. We have a desire to laugh. And so, if you want to bring more humor into your brand, I think it really starts with having a light touch, sprinkling light moments into your copy, into your content, and finding those human relatable pieces. That's where comedy is born. And so that's where people really should start.
I'm really glad that you brought this up, this idea that kind of bringing lightness, and even this term, okay, I'm a total word nerd, going to out myself here. The term levity, right, which we use to reference comedy, actually literally means, a sense of lightness. As other word nerds, call me out on that if I'm wrong. So for a lot of people, and myself included, my brother was always kind of the joker in the family, and I can see the power of comedy, but I'm never sure how to kind of bring that in and not feel, awkward about it. So I really like what you're saying about bringing in this sense of lightness, talking to people in a very real way, bringing in the relatable pieces, maybe even, and maybe I'm extrapolating this from awkward marketing itself, talk about those things that are maybe a little bit difficult to talk about in a real way without trying to kind of hide behind additional formality. Am I reading too much into that, or is that kind of...
No, you're totally nailing it. That's absolutely what it is about. And if you look at how bigger brands are harnessing and leveraging humor, it's not, I like to say you want to sprinkle, not spray. So you don't have to do a sketch comedy show like Awkward Marketing and put on a wig and get a green screen to bring humor into your brand. It really can be something as simple as the text on a button on your, or the headline for your opt-in, or, just, sprinkling little light moments and finding ways, comedy is a disruptor, finding ways to disrupt what somebody might be expecting to read on your website, because that's the other powerful thing about comedy. And that's why I use comedy in Awkward Marketing, is because it's giving my audience something unexpected, something that's new, and that's what gets them to sit up and pay attention. So if I'm scrolling through your website and I see button text that, instead of saying like learn more, says something a little bit lighter, a little bit more human, a little bit more relatable, that's going to stop my scroll, because it's something I'm not expecting to see. If I've got a funny headline, or even just a light headline, or a few little, phrases sprinkled throughout the rest of my copy or my blog or whatever, that's going to, cause me to sit up at the edge of my seat and pay attention to what I'm reading, which is really one of the best side effects of using humor in your content, is that you're getting people to pay attention.
Oh, yes. I always know it's a good podcast interview when I'm like doing the deep nods while I'm on mute and like typing. So yes, that's what I'm doing during my muted moments. I so agree. This idea of disruptor, right? I know when we're talking about brands, something that came up in a previous interview or episode that we did is that one of the things that makes a brand effective, it's its relevance as well as its uniqueness. And we talked a bit about the relevance with the awkward marketing and et cetera. But what I'm hearing is, by using the term disruptor, right? That's a big buzzword these days, is that you're essentially presenting something that's unique enough to cause people to pause and notice and to be like, oh, hey, which is exactly when we talk about the area of over-information, kind of this critical piece. And all other digital agency owners listening to this, please take note about that piece of levity, like in the headline or whatever. It's really interesting because this idea of uniqueness is so critical to effective marketing and an effective brand. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of fear of standing out or separating yourself, especially from the client end. So since we are working with agencies here, we are talking to agency CEOs who might be interested in leveraging this, not just for their own brands, but for their clients. How do you address, when a client is afraid of that uniqueness? They're afraid of standing out, or an agency owner themselves. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Well, I would say you should be more afraid of blending into the background because, as you said, there's a ton of noise out there today. There's just thousands and thousands of pieces of content competing for our attention at any given time on our phones, on our computers, on the television, in the world around us. And so I think that often agency owners and just small businesses in general tend to be afraid that all eyes are on them at all times. Like, oh, everybody's going to look at me. And if I do something different, they're going to be really kind of grabbing the magnifying glance and microanalyzing everything I do. And actually, the reality is people are looking at your stuff for a couple of seconds. So if you don't dare to be different, if you don't dare to disrupt, as we've been saying, you're going to get lost in the sea of sameness. And the thing about disruption is that a lot of people are really preoccupied with, I've got to say something totally new that's never been said before. And they're really stressed about that. And sometimes it's not about saying something new because we all know there's nothing new under the sun. Everything's been said. Everything's been blogged about. Everything's been, just done to death. Sometimes it's just about saying it differently. It's not necessarily the content, but it's the style. And that's what awkward marketing really is doing. I'm not saying anything that hasn't been said about marketing before. It's all been said. It's all been taught on. But maybe it hasn't been said wearing a wig, with a Jurassic Park motif. You know what I'm saying? And so sometimes It's just about saying it differently, not saying something different.
That's so true. And in communication, in content, as well as many of our listeners, you already know that I'm trained in conflict resolution. How you say something, we all know this. You don't have to be trained in conflict resolution to know this. How you say something is as much or probably way, way more important than what it is that you're saying. So again, kind of that bringing relevance as well as bringing uniqueness. What I'm hearing is that by bringing that kind of comedy aspect into it, you're talking about things people already know, but you're doing it in a very, very easy to consume way. Now, I want to kind of shift our conversation, our focus a little bit, because we are speaking to other agency owners. So I want to talk a little bit, not just about awkward marketing and its role, but kind of the behind the scenes of it a little bit. So obviously you run an agency. So is awkward marketing, is it your primary role within the agency? If not, how do you find time to do it? I'd love to, if you don't mind sharing, I'm sure a lot of people are curious about kind of the structural part of it.
Yeah, so awkward marketing is not the only thing I do in the business. I am the lead designer, I'm the lead strategist. I'm, bringing in sales. I'm overseeing all of the creative that's happening in the agency. And so I got a lot on my plate. And the way that I make awkward marketing work within my schedule, well, there's two things. One, I had to decide I was going to make a commitment to this, that this was, I like to say the content you create today is a gift you give your future self. And so I had to, consciously decide in the agency world, there's always a huge list of things you could be doing at any given time. And I had to be willing to say, I am going to make time for this week after week, no matter what's happening with the agency, because this is paying it forward to my future self. And in those slow sales times in the future, this is the stuff that's going to fill that back up. And if I neglect this, I'm going to be kicking myself later. So that's number one. But number two, the way that I really make it happen with my schedule is I batch like a mad woman. And so my latest season, which I just finished, I had everything shot at last fall. So it's been like 9 months since I've shot everything. And so I'll do all of my concept planning at one time. So I'll plan out a whole season at one time. Then I'll source all the costumes and I'll get all of the props that I need at one time. Then I shoot all the videos at one time. And then week after week, I will admit, I don't do all the editing, months in advance. The editing I'm doing on a weekly basis. So that's like on a weekly basis, the only commitment that I have. Now, if I had to shoot all the videos, come up with the concepts and the scripts, do all of the writing for social media and for my blog that all is connected to that. If I had to do that at one time, it would not get done. So batching has just, so I carve out a few times a year where I'm doing like intensive weekends where I'm doing all of my shooting, and those are very long days. But then I'm really grateful to myself later because I've got months and months of footage that I can then just work on week by week in terms of editing it down and getting it ready to promote.
I love that. So again, key takeaways. So one, batching like a mad woman, as you said. Before we even talk about that, I just want to reiterate something you said that really, really I love. The content you create today is the gift you give your future self, just in relation to batching. So part of it was, as I'm hearing, commitment to making time for it week after week and using that kind of why as your propeller that keeps you moving, but also acknowledging that it's easier to carve out an intensive day or weekend than it is to carve out like an intensive day every week kind of a thing. But I'm curious, you mentioned you do the editing every week. So does that mean, do you produce this all like literally yourself? Do you have kind of VAs or specialists helping you at all? Is it literally you editing it every week?
I am editing it. I mean, I do have support in terms of organizing all of the content promotion, getting it out on social media and getting it onto the website and everything like that. But, this is not something I necessarily would recommend. The reason I do all my own editing is because it's high production. So I've got green screens and I've got different characters and to outsource that would be extremely expensive. And I'm not at a place where I could spend thousands per video to produce. So, for an agency owner that's strapped for time, this might not be the best solution to go with something so high production right off the bat. But the thing is, I did test and validate the idea before I jumped into that. I didn't just start doing these high production videos. I started very low production and low tech and very, minimal in that terms, no editing needed. And once I figured out what worked and what was resonating, I was willing to dedicate the time to it. And since this is comedy, there's a level of, you have to have comic timing. You have to understand comedy, to be able to edit this. So I decided to take it onto my plate. But I'll add into this that awkward marketing, in addition to be my main source of content and creating brand awareness and, driving views to the site, it's also something I personally enjoy. It's people ask me, what's your hobby? This is my hobby. It is technically work, but it's also something that brings me a lot of pleasure. And that's what I'm always teaching my clients. And I'm also talking about with fellow agency owners is when you're choosing that piece of core content, if it's video, if it's written, if it's podcasting, whatever it is, it has to be something that you enjoy doing. Just like if you're choosing, your main social platforms, don't choose a platform that you hate being on because you're going to burn out. But if you can choose a core, source of content that you also enjoy creating, that's going to help push you through, because you are going to get those times and those days where, you hate it. And there are days where I'm editing an episode and I'm really tired and it's been a long week, but I find myself laughing at my own jokes and really, finding joy in the process. And that's so key to keeping going,
Yeah. That finding joy in the process. I think that we're very much encouraged to kind of find what we love and do what we love, etc. But I'm a huge fan of finding what you love within what you're doing. And hence these podcasts, which is pretty much me just having awesome conversations with really cool people that I respect and learning a lot. And something that I think you brought up before that I also want to call back attention to is this idea of not just you burning out on a platform or on a medium that you're not super stoked on, but using your level of burnout on it potentially as a bit of a gauge. You mentioned, for example, that you chose video because you could kind of show up and do it and be done. And then in time after you validated it, it turned into a much bigger time suck, but not time suck. I should say time investment, definitely investment. But as you said, it's something that you love doing. It appeals to your audience. It's achieving what you want it to achieve. You found a way that works for you in your schedule. For me, for example, I love writing. I've loved writing forever. That's why I have pursued my whole life the way it is. As I mentioned before, actually shutting myself in a room and committing to doing that writing every week to launch it, I find very, very challenging. But working with my strategists to do so, for example, while working on the podcast, which again, I can kind of show up, have all been very, very successful. So again, don't want to kind of hijack what you're saying, more just want to unpack a little bit of what you're saying and not just what you intellectually think you love, but putting a little bit of time in there, seeing how successful it is, seeing how able you are to maintain it and letting it grow. That whole done is the new perfect thing and getting enjoyment out of it. I think that's really, really powerful.
Exactly. You want to go and validate the idea first. So even though in theory you're like, oh, I really might love, maybe you're starting a podcast. I love having conversations with people, but then you do a few episodes and you keep it kind of low tech and you realize, wow, all of the planning and all of the this and the that, I really don't love this. Maybe that isn't the direction you go in, or you do some video and it's just sucking the life out of you, or the opposite. You start doing a little, you do a test run on some form of content. It's landing. People are, because part of what fuels awkward marketing, even on those times when I don't want to be editing or I have a project I would rather be doing or I should rather be doing, it's the validation that I'm getting from my audience is part of what fuels me. And so that's important too. A lot of people spend time kind of, overthinking, what should I do? Should I do this? And what you really need to do is get something out there, see how it lands, see what resonates most with your audience, because that is going to fuel you. When you're creating content to an empty room, which is how it all is in the beginning, that's the truth. But if you do that for too long without any feedback, anybody, that is really draining. And so put something out there, see what lands, because when it lands, that's the push that's going to keep you creating the next piece of content.
Yes, absolutely. And let's talk about this a little bit more, the concept of it landing, kind of we've talked about the back end on the production side. If you don't mind sharing, I would love to hear a little bit more on the kind of release side. Like, what sort of data are you potentially tracking for this? When you reference the validation that you get from your audience, are you talking about, raving fans like me, or like the person on your landing page for the show that says you have the best content on the whole internet? Or are you talking about, like numbers, you're tracking the numbers, things are converting? Like, can you just speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, it's all of the above. Of course, the end goal is, don't we all want to have people saying, wow, I read your blog and it's amazing, or I watched your show and it's amazing. And that is certainly one way that I track it, which is not as data driven. It's more anecdotal. As I've gone with the show, I get more and more of my leads coming in saying, I've watched the show, which also I'll just drop in here, is one of the purposes of the show is to kind of educate my leads about my worldview. So when they come in, they're ready for me and they know what they're getting themselves into. So that's really good. So having my leads say, hey, I watched the show, or I binged it last night, is a great indicator that I'm going in the right direction. But I do also track the actual data. I do track the views. I have analytics to the website. I'm looking at, how much. I do put a little bit of ad money to make sure that my content gets lift, but how much ad money I put depends on how much engagement I get right away. Because we know with social specifically, the more initial engagement you have on a piece of content, that's a good barometer for, should I put money on this? Versus if you put content out there and it's like crickets, that's like, I'm probably not going to get much lift on this, so I probably shouldn't spend too much money on this,
There's a gold nugget. I'm sure there's some of our listeners who perhaps weren't aware of that or needed to hear it again, so thank you.
Yeah, so I am looking at the number, and when I look at the numbers, it is also more from when I'm planning the next season, I'll use the numbers from the previous season to say, okay, this type of approach or this character or this kind of way of doing it really landed, this other way didn't. And so that will help me kind of say, all right, what content am I going to create next based on, where I got the most views and how long people are watching. And that's also good for kind of structuring the show. Like, okay, here's where people are dropping off, so here's where I might want to pick it up. Like when I transitioned from the Facebook Live show to the more produced show, I consciously made a decision to keep it really tight, like around 5-ish minutes. Like typically my shows go from like 3 to 7 minutes long. And that's because I know I saw a huge drop off after the first few minutes of watching, my longer videos. My videos used to be like 20 minutes long. And I'm sorry, but nobody has time to watch 20-minute videos. I mean, really, it's a rare case that we're going to sit down and watch a 20, 30, 40-minute video in its entirety. So those numbers help me decide, all right, this is the length that I'm going to go for. And yeah.
Okay, that's really, really helpful to know. So again, just kind of those key takeaways, tracking the numbers, yes, kind of seeing on kind of a qualitative level how this is impacting your leads and how they're coming in and their awareness of you, their awareness of your brand, but also on the quantitative level, tracking the data, also leveraging the data from past seasons to help you plan future content. I think that's really important and powerful. Now, for the kind of done on this, continuing on this train of done is the new perfect, did you start tracking that data from the beginning? How was that different when you were doing the Facebook Lives? Or was it just something that as you started to see, wow, this is working, yes, I'm committed to this, maybe I should start tracking that?
In the early days, no. I mean, we all have so many things to focus on. I wish I could say that I had some elaborate spreadsheet that I was looking at, but I just was kind of tracking the data very loosely, looking at the views, looking at how that turned into traffic to the site, but I wasn't tracking it in, as I said, I didn't have like elaborate graphs that I was looking at, whereas I do track things a little bit more precisely now. And so, yeah, back to that done is better than perfect. I would say don't spend a ton of time at the data. I mean, you can look at the data and you get a gut check. If you're not, you'll see, and this is where you got to be consistent, you'll see over a period of 6 weeks, 8 weeks, okay, I got absolutely no lift, or at week 6, here's where it really picked up, just looking at that and doing a gut check and kind of just looking at the basic numbers is really all you need when you're getting started.
That makes a lot of sense. And, while the organizer within me loves the idea of some sort of complex, graph or spreadsheet or charts to look through, I'm sure our listeners are feeling a little bit more relieved that they didn't need that. They don't need that to get going. Now, you talked about how when we start producing content, initially, we are kind of performing for an empty room or writing for an empty room. And then over time, people come to us. And I think there is this idea that build it and they will come. But I think that as marketers, we're aware that it's not quite so cut and dry as that. So I'm wondering, when you first started, your Facebook Live show, were there people showing up? How long did it take to create that traction? And I'm curious in the context of not necessarily your own personal success journey. That's amazing. But, more like what are some of these perhaps red or green flags that people can use to understand whether they should keep going on something or market it differently or let it go because it's not getting the traction that they need?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that people let things go too quickly. This is something I see with my clients a lot of the time. They'll put out like 3 blogs and they didn't get massive success in those blogs. So they take that as an indicator that their content is worthless. And they're like, I'm not cut out for this. So in the early days of the show, I mean, I got on camera expecting there would be no one there. And when it comes to Facebook Live, my recommendation is always to be producing content for the replay viewer, because especially when you're doing things on your page, your business page, it's really hard to get that organic traction. So I showed up with a mindset of, there's probably going to be a small room of people here and I am okay with that. And I'm still going to create high quality content knowing it's going to eventually be evergreen and people will stumble upon it, in theory, months down the line. And that's what I kind of like to prepare my clients with. And when I'm talking with even other agency owners about creating content, you do kind of have to go into it knowing that in the early days, you aren't going to get a lot of traction and you have to push through that. And so I do like to give people a recommendation of starting into their content, going for at least 8 to 12 weeks before they make any decisions and any pivots, because that's really how long it takes. I mean, minimum to start getting any real feedback. And also because, when you think about it from an SEO perspective or even from the search or from the social algorithm perspective, Google doesn't put you in search results until it knows that you're reliable. So if you put out 1 blog a year, you're going to have to do a little bit more work to get Google's attention. And so it really is about the long game. So yeah, 8 to 12 weeks minimum of consistent weekly content before you throw in the towel or decide to totally switch things up. And if you go into it with the expectation, I'm not going to get much traction here, it kind of helps to prepare you psychologically, because it can feel really demoralizing to put your heart into content and to not get that immediate gratification. But then if you do get traction, it's like a wonderful surprise. Yeah. But I think just going into it not expecting much will help, because it's hard not to get that immediate feedback, but the consistency will reveal what you need to know to go forward.
Okay. Yeah, that's actually very aligned with something that we talk to our agency partners and clients about often, which is they're like, yay, we want to do content marketing. And we're like, okay, are you prepared for like a minimum 3-month investment before you start to get results? At that 8 to 12 week mark, let's say, I have been producing regular content, been sending out an email or showing up on a Facebook Live. At that 8 to 12 week mark, what are some of those specific things that might tell you this isn't working, or this is the type of shift that I might make, if you know?
Well, yeah, I mean, you do want to look at those numbers. You want to look at, are people consuming this content, right? Are they clicking on it? Are they engaging with it? Because, there are certain social platforms that are easier than others to get kind of superficial engagement. Like if you're putting something on Instagram and you put some hashtags on there, you get a ton of likes that might be very empty likes. So I think you really want to focus on comments and engagement and people who are showing you that they've actually put some thought into what you've put out there. If you're getting that type of engagement, that is typically a good indicator that you're heading in the right direction, versus if all you're doing is getting likes, or you're getting like a couple seconds of views on a video, but you're not getting any comments, you're not getting people to click or take the next step. I like to tie content to a lead magnet. You got to look at your list. Is my list growing? All those types of things. If those things aren't there, then maybe it might be, time to pivot and try another approach.
Mm-hmm. All very wise insights. In terms of kind of this approach and how it shifts over time, would you say, and I totally understand if your experience is primarily in video, would you say that different forms of content, like a live show versus a video show, or, like written blog posts, do you have any insight on how somebody knows kind of what direction to go? Yeah, what direction might be more effective for their clients? Or was it really about, just what you enjoy doing?
So, okay, you start having this kind of core piece of content. This is going to be my main content where I'm putting all of my energy. So it might be video, it might be long form blog posts, it might be podcasts. But then from that one core piece of content, I do strongly encourage repurposing it for all of the different ways that your audience might like to consume content, because everyone's going to be different. Or for all of the different times of day or play, because how we consume a podcast is very specific versus how we consume a blog post. We probably aren't consuming a podcast in the middle of our workday. We're not stopping everything to listen to a podcast. We might listen to a podcast like on our morning walk, or while we're doing the dishes, or whatever, at night when we're, holding our baby, which is my case. Versus in the middle of a workday, I might be more likely to stop my scroll and quickly skim through a blog, which is on, silent. I don't have to put audio on, and I don't have to disrupt my flow as much. And so I like to encourage people to take that core piece of content and then repurpose the heck out of it and turn it into other forms of content. So I will turn a video into a blog post, and I'll turn that into an email, and I might turn that into a pin for Pinterest and a little short different versions of the concept. I'll turn that into little short microblogs that I put on Instagram, and maybe a graphic that I would put on Facebook. So you take that one core piece of content. I'm not saying you need to, blog and do video and do images and do email. It's more like I have one core piece of content, and then I'm expanding that and turning it into the different ways that people might want to consume it, which also ensures that more people see it. Instead of just putting out one piece of content and hoping it lands, you take that content and you get all the juice out of it. It's following that 80-20 rule, that 20% of your time should be creating the core content, 80% of your time should be promoting it, but you just don't want to promote the very same thing over and over again. So if I can take one thing and turn it into a bunch of other things, that is where I'm going to get, the biggest bang for my buck or / time investment.
I think that's the biggest bang for your time investment is always going to be something that is super relevant to agencies, since none of us seem to ever have enough time. One of the things that you kind of brought up a little bit before that I'm loving and want to dig into a little bit more is not just repurposing, and maybe a better way to frame that is on the topic of repurposing and leveraging that one thing that you've committed to kind of day in, day out, or week in, week out, and using that to appeal to a variety of different contexts or a variety of different ways people like to consume. You mentioned the kind of larger funnel piece, having a lead magnet, etc. What are some of the ways that you can repurpose or leverage or tie your ongoing content into a larger funnel or into these other pieces or into building your email list other than just, subscribe here button? Can you speak to that a bit?
Yeah, so there's three main ways that I like to do this, and I like to encourage people to do it. One, before I'm even planning the content, I want to think, how could this potentially relate to my main lead magnet? So I have one main lead magnet that if all else fails, I'll send people here. And it's an ebook I have called Don't Hire a Web Designer Until You Read This Book, right? So when I'm going to plan my content, I'm thinking about, all right, is this going to somehow relate back to that lead magnet? Will I be able to send people there at kind of the, at the end of this post or the end of this video? So that's number one. Number two, sometimes if the topic is really specific, I will create a specific lead magnet that relates to the episode that I'm doing. So speaking of repurposing content, I had an episode a few weeks ago. It was all about repurposing content. So I created a lead magnet just about that topic that people could download when they interacted with the episode. And then sometimes what I'll do is I'll use the content as a way of shining a light on the brand. And then I'll create like contests, or, I do a series around Halloween where I'll do 5 videos in a row. And then, I'll have people vote on their favorite, and they, and to win something like a consult with me, or they'll win like a gift card or something like that. And so I'll use the content as a way to get people, interested. And then I'll say, okay, enter here. And so it's not just subscribe. Now, of course, I do have like, hey, subscribe if you want to, get the latest episodes of Awkward Marketing. But I find that that's the least compelling, call to action is like, hey, get updates. Like nobody wants your updates. You know what I'm saying? Very few people want updates. So you want to, have something of value. And again, that goes back to the idea of training your leads and kind of preparing them to work with you. That lead magnet is helping to prepare them to be the ideal client for you. So
yeah, absolutely. And this is something I know when we're talking about one of the 3 pillars of content strategy, the voice and tone, we talk about that a lot, like preparing your clients to work with you, having them understand both on a kind of personality level, what to expect from you, but also on a value and process level. One of the things you mentioned that perhaps didn't get enough voice time in this episode was that you actually leverage awkward marketing to clear up misunderstandings or set good expectations, or, like they are evergreen pieces of content that you leverage in your own business as much as for your own marketing. So if that didn't come through and you guys haven't watched the awkward marketing videos, first of all, go watch. Why do you go watch them right now? But also that idea that it can help you as part of your client process, not just to attract clients, but to reinforce their experience with you. I think that's really cool. I have so many more questions and I could dig into this for so much longer, but I also do want to respect your time and we're kind of getting to the end here. So before I wind us down a little bit, I'm just curious whether there's anything that we haven't talked about that you think would be really, really valuable for our listeners to know, or anything cool that you're working on that you want to share, just any last pieces that you wanted to talk about.
Going back to this idea of taking your content and repurposing it, one thing I hear a lot from agency owners and from my clients is, they're worried about repeating themselves. They're worried like, oh, people are going to get tired of hearing from me. And, we started this show talking about how there's so much noise out there. And I would encourage people to remember there's so much content vying for our attention. It's very likely that people haven't heard you the first time. So that's number one. Like, don't worry about repeating yourself, especially when it comes to repurposing. Probably, even if they saw it the first time, they might not have been in the space to like really, take their time to focus and consume. So you really want to repurpose to make sure that people really did actually see and interact with that great content that you're producing. But the second thing is, even if people have consumed content and they've heard the message the first time, just as it typically takes 5 to 7 interactions with a brand to be ready to make a purchase, it also often takes 5 to 7 times hearing the same message before it really sinks in and you absorb it. And so when you repeat your main, because you talk about your content pillars, you're going to have kind of core pieces of your messaging that you say again and again, and you might feel like people are tired of hearing it, but actually typically hearing it again and again is what helps them to really sink in, for them to really get the message and for them to really think about it in a serious way. And so you don't want to be afraid of repeating yourself. In fact, you want to repeat yourself. And it's also what positions you as an authority, having these kind of core messaging areas that you're returning to again and again. So I definitely wanted to work that in there.
And conveniently, that's also one of our pillars of content strategy, is the messaging pieces you leverage over and over. But no, I love what you're saying. Don't be afraid of repetition. I wonder if that's why engagement, you mentioned you're looking for engagement, not just eyes on your thing, but actions on your thing as being more powerful. I wonder if that back and forth from the engagement also kind of helps them cement a little bit more both what you're trying to say and who you are. And just in general, what you have talked about in terms of that engagement engagement and repetition and consistency, I think are just so powerful. And all coming back to, we'll kind of end on this note, which is done is the new perfect. Get it out there. I know watching your awkward marketing videos, it can be really easy to feel a little bit kind of like overwhelmed or in awe and be like, wow, I could never achieve something like that. But hopefully, listeners, over the course of this podcast, you've been able to understand a little bit better how you can leverage a similar kind of journey for yourself, even if it's not awesome comedy videos. Anyway, but before we let everyone go, Rachael, I just love if people want to hear more about you, if they want to, talk to you, if they want to experience awkward marketing, what are the best places or the best place to find you on the internet?
Well, you can always go to awkwardmarketing.com, and I am RKA Ink, which is RKA INK. You can go to the .com for that, or you could go to RKA INK on any social platform, and that's how you find me. Reach out. Let's talk. Let's hang. Let's be friends. I love new buddies. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah, and I know not to like flood your inbox, but I know that talking to Rachael has been so wonderful for me, even just to talk to somebody who is so down to earth as a digital agency owner. Just so refreshing and awesome. So thanks again for coming on the show, for sharing not just about awkward marketing, but I think the kind of behind the scenes and implementation stuff that I know I was super curious about. I suspect many of our listeners are as well. But just thank you. Okay, listeners, so as usual, we'll have all of those links in the show notes, all of the kind of awesome highlights, key takeaways, etc. Other than that, this has been another awesome episode of Say It Online. I've really enjoyed this interview. Tune in next time and have a great day. And that does it for another amazing episode of the Say It Online podcast. Join us next week. And don't forget to like and subscribe, whether it's iTunes, whatever your favorite podcast player is. It is always appreciated. It really makes a difference for us. It helps us get this word out to more people. As always, this episode was brought to you by our sponsor and Say's own business, Anansi Content. If you're a digital agency owner and you're still wasting too much time chasing down content that maybe isn't even all that great, let's talk. We've spent years working on the best process for selling, planning, and delivering amazing conversion content for your client projects. Better yet, we moosh our process to yours so that your client and you have a seamless and amazing experience the entire time through. If you're interested, just go to our website. That's www.anansicontent.com. That's ANANSI content.com. And just click Let's Talk. I'd love to chat with you. Someone else on the team would also love to chat with you too. Hope you have an amazing rest of your day.